That's really what I want to talk about. I won't go on for ages and ages and ages. I think that's probably a bit unfair, given that we're here to hear a whole range of different views on this. But I do think that one of the things I want to do is connect the struggle that we're facing here with the struggles across the world. We've already heard about Hong Kong and the struggle for democracy there, and just to think about some of the positive solutions that we can throw out in order to challenge that. Woo! The ground moved. To challenge that for the long term. The first thing is, we're doing this meeting here, this gathering, on the eve of the big demonstration that we're all going to be taking part in tomorrow. Britain needs a pay rise. And we're certainly going to be there proudly marching with all the trade unions, with all of the other activists, saying that a pay rise, basic, decent living wages is critical for any type of change that we want to see in this country. Because we know that over the past 40 years, we've seen a gradual widening of the gap between the haves and the have-nots. All of those people who've been left behind as a result of the austerity programs and all of the other neoliberal programs that have been foisted upon us ever since the 1970s. And I think that's a really important historical overview, because they keep trying to tell us that it's as a result of the debt crisis, it's as a result of all the overspending and the deficit that they're introducing these programs. But we know that that is absolutely fundamentally not the case. This is part of an ongoing neoliberal program to restructure our society for the benefit of the 1%. It's for the benefit of capital, and that's what Thatcher brought in the 80s, and it's what was repeated by the Blair government and is now being rolled out by Cameron and his friends from the Liberal Democrat Party. And that's, I think, an important thing for us to recognise, because when we're fighting back against austerity here, that's part of a global programme of the transnational capitalist class, who meet every year in Bilderberg, in Davos, in the Trilateral Commission, and in all of their little secret hideaways, stitching up our future so that they get richer and richer, and we are left in the same sort of drudgery on a treadmill which will never get us out of poverty, never get us out to the sort of societies that we want. And it's not just something which is happening on the national level. We know about austerity in this country. You don't need to tell me about all the public sector jobs that are going, all the public services that are being scrapped. You don't need to tell me about the fact that wages are being driven down and down and down. And when Ed Miliband says he's going to try and aspire to a wage of £8 an hour by 2020, it's ridiculous. It's already £8 an hour is not enough to live on. It's well below a living wage. And we need to press all of the buttons we can press. We need to make sure we're fighting on all fronts to push that up. So when we march tomorrow, we're not just going to say we want a little bit more. We want a complete shift, because the concept of a living wage challenges capitalism at its roots. Capitalism is about the appropriation of surplus value created by working people, the appropriation of that value in order to turn it into capital accumulation for the 1%. In order to try and fight back against that, we need to reclaim that surplus value, which is created by labour power, created by working people, and then given over almost willingly to the 1%. That's why we believe that the whole relevance of holding this demonstration here on the eve of the big TUC march for living wages, for decent fair pay, is such an important connection. But as I say, this isn't just about a national programme of austerity foisted upon us by our traditional rulers. This is about an international programme of giving more and more power to capital and taking it away from ordinary people, taking it away from societies and communities across the world. And you will all have been massively involved, I'm sure, in the big fight that we're currently waging to combat that at the international level. The fight against TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, being negotiated completely in secret between the EU and the USA. That is another program in order to try to remove any sense of power from us, the people, and hand it over to capital. Giving new powers to big business to sue governments in private courts for decisions that are made in the public interest. And we already know what that looks like. We've seen it when Philip Morris is suing the Australian government for introducing public health policies to make them sell cigarettes in plain packaging only. We know that when the people of Germany rose up in the wake of the Fukushima nuclear disaster and demanded that nuclear power should be shut down in Germany for good. And they succeeded, and by 2022, there will be no more nuclear power in Germany. What did the Swedish company Vattenfall do? It ran straight over to one of these secret courts and is suing the German people for 3.7 billion euros for daring to exercise their right to democracy, for daring to exercise their choice for a better future. And it's exactly those new powers that David Cameron, Vince Cable and their friends are trying to introduce now through TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. It's the same powers that they're already negotiating to introduce in the EU-Canada Treaty and a whole range of these other trade deals which open up our societies, our markets, our public services, everything that we hold dear, and sacrifice it on the altar of neoliberal free market capitalism. That's why we're saying it's not just about a fight here in Britain, it's about a fight on the international level to stop that program from going ahead. But the last things I wanted to just focus on was how we can learn from what people have achieved in other countries around the world in terms of fighting for a better future. Because I don't know how you feel, but for me, it feels that we're constantly firefighting. We're constantly reacting and resisting to the things that they throw at us. If it's not an austerity program, it's a bank bailout. If it's not a bank bailout, then it's another slashing of welfare benefits. It's another massive swathe of unemployment coming in from the public sector. And if it's not that, it's a whole raft of other trade deals. It's another set of austerity measures dropped down on us from the European Union. What we're saying is that we need a change. So it's not just about us reacting all the time, but it's about us putting in place new structures, new ideas, and new policies, new thoughts that can challenge that for the future. And we've seen that not just in Spain with Podemos rising up, in Greece with Syriza, in all of the great election victories that you've seen in democracies across Western Europe, where they are beginning to challenge from the left. But we've also seen that in Latin America, where social movements have risen up and they have created political challenges to the elites. Political challenges which have swept away the old elites and created completely new dispensations for the future, new ambitions and new aspirations to try to overcome their past and to create democratic paths away from capitalism. And that sort of move is what we desperately need here. And you can put that around three basic principles, which when you read all of the different programs of an alternative from across the world, it always seems to crystallize around three particular things. The first of these is popular sovereignty. And that means reclaiming democracy, not just at a national level of governments, which was the thing when we were talking about this 15 years ago and everyone was saying globalization, it's a great threat. We need to reclaim power for our national sovereignty. No, we need to take it much, much deeper and restore democracy at its roots. Popular sovereignty. And you can look to the examples of those countries like Iceland or Tunisia or Ecuador or Bolivia, which have completely rewritten constitutions in order to be able to give the people's aspirations top billing. You can also see it in countries like Venezuela, where they have local municipal committees, workplace committees, bringing people into the democratic space and building from the grassroots. You can see it in the economic policies of restoring power to cooperatives and other collective engagements of people so that they take control of the economic space as well as the political space. So that concept of popular sovereignty could not be more relevant here in Parliament Square, looking across at an institution which denies us that say. It denies us that participation. So I think the first thing we have to try and work out in our structures, how can we reclaim that space? Not just in demonstrations and actions, but much more going through all of the processes we take part in. Whether you're members of trade unions, whether you're members of local residents associations, whatever clubs or participations you have, pushing that political message through. So one, popular sovereignty. The second big issue here is common ownership. If you don't own the means of production, if you don't own the commons, if you don't own and have rights over public services, you can never turn them back to your advantage. And we know that this is so important because the first wave of enclosures that the neoliberal program brought in was a new wave of privatizations. Privatizing water, privatizing education, privatizing health, privatizing anything they can get their hands on, and not letting it go back into public hands in the future. And that again is another of the really important threats from these big trade deals. We know already that our government is selling us down the river when it comes to all those things. If we ever get another government in where we want to try and reclaim those powers, if they've already been put into a trade deal, you can't get them back. And we want them back. We've seen the type of opportunities for common ownership, sharing, a new understanding of the commons where we all participate, we all own it, and we all control its future. You see that on the internet, you see that in carpools, you see that in the massive cooperative movement that lives around the world, you see that in workers' collectives, the solidarity economy, the social economy, all of these different models which are still going towards the same basic aim of common ownership and control. So number one, popular sovereignty. Number two, common ownership. And the final one is social production. Production not for profit, not so that that value can be whisked away by the 1% and stored in their Swiss bank accounts, but production which is there for social need and not treating us as commodities in the system, not treating our public services as commodities, not treating the basic commons that we know and we use as commodities. And that decommodification process starts with each one of us. It starts with our rejection of the logic of capitalism. It says that we want a world which is not dominated by the profit motive. We want a world where we produce things for need, not for profit, for use value, not for exchange. And when we can start making that type of change, the liberation that that brings to people, to societies, to women who have so often borne the brunt of this neoliberal attack, that liberation opens up all the possibilities that we want for a new and better future. We cannot achieve that without a political challenge to the elite. Turning people power into political power has got to be our first step. And that's why I'm really thrilled to be here, to be part of this merging of the movement, this movement of movements which comes together to challenge on all these different fronts. We'll be there on the demonstration tomorrow making a big noise for a pay rise for Britain, calling on the government to give us the living wage, and then going forward and calling on all the political parties and going forward beyond that and turning this political pressure into action. We'll be there for all of the other key actions on trade treaties and on all of the international side of this program. But most importantly, we'll be there for the democratic pressure, pushing for popular sovereignty so that we, the peoples, can take back power and we can determine our own future and we can build a better world. Thank you very much for coming. More power to Occupy Democracy. And now I hand over to Maria.